Excellent. Good. Jay, since we're already in contact here, I'm going to ask you to recite the bracha over Torah study. Celia, can you? Thank you. You knew what I was going to say. Excellent. Hold on 1 second. Wendy, can you tell people that I wanted to share? Okay. I didn't want to make too many copies. Shabbat shalom, everybody. Welcome in the room and on the Zoom. Okay, we're doing the bracha over Torah study. Jay, please. We can't hear you. People should be able to unmute themselves, but please keep yourselves muted until the relevant moment when you are speaking and I call on.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם אשר קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו לעסוק בדברי תורה.
Amen. 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 So blessed are you, source of the universe, who has sanctified us with your commandments and instructions and instructed us to engage and so deeply in the words of Torah. Hey, Shabbat Shalom, Shabbat Shalom, welcome. All right, I'm going to share my screen. Today we're going to look into the issue of what it means to blaspheme. If I just share my screen there, this is how it should look. Okay, it's good. It's all good. Okay. So the parsha is Emor, and what we're doing here today is narrative. And the parsha ends with a story. Now there are exactly two narratives in the book of Leviticus, which is crazy. I love narratives, so I've been missing it. And they're both very disturbing. So trigger warning, there's some disturbing imagery and action in this story. But what I want to dive deeply into is the notion of God's name. What does it mean to sanctify or desecrate God's name? Okay. So the first source, just as an introduction to God's name. So God at Sinai, and it's good to go to Exodus 20 because in a few weeks we're going to be standing again at Sinai on Shavuot, right? Shavuot is coming up, the holiday of Revelation. And the 10 Commandments, what we refer to as 10 Commandments, start with God's introduction of God's self. Anochi Adonai Elohecha, Asher Hotzeiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim mi'beit avadim. I Adonai am your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. So here's where narrative, right? The narrative of the Exodus begins to enter into the literature, the legal literature, and again, regarding different instructions, commandments in the Bible, God says, Ani Adonai Elohecha, I am Lord your God. So this is like a big communication on God's part. And if you think about the Exodus, the whole story, right? What does that mean? Celia, are we still good? Are we still here?
Hi, we're still here. I'm trying to figure out if maybe we can switch the mic. We're picking up a lot of background noise at the moment.
I'm so sorry. Now, for some reason, whatever was on the screen in the front of the room is gone. It's back. Excellent. Okay, everybody bear with us. These are the challenges of our times, which is in person and on screen. And I'm trying to be present to both as much as I can. So here we are. Okay. It's hard to see now. Yeah, could you just sit there? Thank you so much.
You're now the outsider.
So the goal of the Exodus, the whole liberation, is that the Israelites, and even the Egyptians, it says, shall come to know God. And one can say that's the whole goal of the Torah. But what does it mean to know God? So here, at the beginning of the Israelites, as a nation standing aside, the beginning of their knowing God. So let's just keep that in mind as a big frame. And then in our parsha, before the narrative, which comes at the end of the parsha, we have this instruction about God's name. So here's the instruction in source 2. Ushmartem mitzvotai v'asitem otam, Ani Adonai, as I was just saying, you shall faithfully observe my commandments. I am Adonai. So God is asserting God's identity. You have to see it.
I have to stand.
You have to stand?
Yeah.
Okay, you can stand. Okay, you stand. Attend Misabim Hayom. You're standing with us today. I love it. Okay. So, God, you shall observe my instructions. I am Adonai. So there's something about God's instructions that are, perhaps we can say, encoded with the identity of God. Right, so that when we do those instructions and we enact those mitzvot, somehow we are bringing God or God's name into the world, okay? Then it says, and here's where it begins to get interesting. So let me just say, big picture. I want to do a deep dive into the nature of God's name, the nature of Kiddusha, holiness, and the nature of profaning and what it means. And because for that, we're going to look at word roots, which I think is going to be a lot of fun. When I say a deep dive, I say like in less than an hour, we're going to do a deep dive. So we can do a whole course on this. So we'll do our best in an hour, and I invite you to continue the conversation. So, Ushmartem mitzvot. Okay, I'm sorry. Below, verse 32. Lamed Bet. Below techalelu et shem kodshi v'nikdashti b'toch b'nei Yisrael ani Adonai. So you shall not profane to Chalalu, whatever profane means, my holy name, whatever holy means. And we're going to put those two, on the burner, or not exactly the back burner, but we're going to investigate both of those concepts and words. V'nikdashti, right? So that I can be sanctified or made holy. Again, that same verb of holiness, the verb of holiness, that root appears 3 times in this verse. B'toch b'nei Israel, in the midst of b'nei Israel. So it's not that God should be sanctified above, God should be sanctified in our midst. Okay, where the name of God should be sanctified in our midst, in community. And then again, Ani Adonai mikadshechem. I am Adonai who sanctifies you. Yes, Wendy.
Can you discuss the flip-flopping of Ani Adonai and Anochi Adonai?
No.
Okay. There you go.
I don't really, it's a really good question. I don't have anything to say about that right now.
Okay.
All right. It's not, and it feels like a little bit away from the direction we're going.
Okay.
Okay. Hamotzi, is there another source sheet?
No, we're going to watch on here.
Okay. Hamotzi etchem. So again, we are continuing. What is God's identity? Who is God, right? Hamotzi etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim liyot lachem Elohim ani Adonai. So again, going back. I am God who sanctifies you, who is mikadshechem, who makes you holy.
Please scroll down.
What?
Please scroll down on the screen.
Oh, I'm supposed to scroll down. Thank you for telling me that. Yes. All right. Okay. Was the right place now? I who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I Adonai. So again, we're getting I Adonai. God's identity, right, is sort of inscribed all over these texts. Now, let's take a step back and look at the concept of techalelu. What is that? What is profane, right? What is holy? Okay.
Yeah, it's
Okay, so what is profane? So it has a very interesting, as they call it, semantic field, right? So what is it? To bore, right? To wound, to dissolve, to profane, to break, to begin, right? Latchil, to play, right? To play a flute, which is hollow, right? So So there's something about. Okay,
We're just moving things.
yeah,
Trying to
yeah.
get things together.
Station break just to, technological issues. Okay, we're here. So it's related to hollowing out. Let's stay with that for the moment. Hollowing out. So there's something about profane. Look here. Something about profaning, which means to hollow out, to make empty. Do you know my scripture?
Yeah.
Oh. Okay. All right. So now let's see what holiness possibly means. And I say possibly because the word holiness is actually not in the passage that I'm about to bring. But I have this association because it's the opposite of halal. It's the opposite of empty. I mean, this passage I'm about to show you is about God filling up. And what I'm wondering is kadosh, does kadosh have something to do with sort of filling up reality or filling up presence? It means, we all know that like to make something holy is to separate, right? To put it, to set it apart. But it's also to unite with God's presence. So I want to do a little investigation of like, what is God's presence? What is God's presence? What is its effect in the world? Okay, so now we're looking at source 4.
Can everybody pause for a second?
I'm going to pause for 1 second.
Sorry.
Everybody start reading Exodus 40.
I'm still at the empty place.
No, we're going to go back to the empty place. Stay there, but now I want the empty place to get filled up. Okay, Lori, just hold on. Okay, so what happens at the end of Exodus? This is the final passage of Exodus. It's fascinating. So we're talking about the completion of the Mishkan. So I'm just going to skim part of this and then we'll go into the Hebrew a little bit. He set up the enclosure, Moshe, around the tabernacle and the altar and put up the screen for the gate of the enclosure. When Moshe had finished the work, Vayichal Moshe et hamelacha, and you see how this is also an echo of what happens in Genesis when God finishes the work of creation, Vayichal. Vayichas ha'anan et ohel moed ukvod Adonai maleh et hamishkan. The cloud covered the tent of meeting and the presence of Adonai filled. Okay, so we have obviously the opposite of emptiness and filling here. And this is what interested me. V'lo yachol Moshe lavo el ohel moed ki shachen alav ha'anan ukvod Adonai maleh et hamishkan. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled upon it and the presence of Adonai filled the tabernacle. So there was something about God's presence in the Anan, which was physical, right? Physical in the sense that it filled so much. That presence was so like dense. Moses could physically not enter the Ohel Moed. What is going on here, right? Okay, so all right, I'm not going to read the rest of this. You can skim it to yourselves. And we're going to go to the very disturbing story at the end of our parsha. So fasten your seatbelts. And we are in Leviticus 24, 10 to 23, source 5. Well, let me just raise this up. Okay. Vayetze ben Isha Yisraelit. Yisraelit, yes. So then came out among the Israelites a man whose mother was Israelite. So interesting. Like, what is going on with this identification? Ben Ish Mitzri, the son of an Egyptian father. Now, the first thing we need to ask is, how did that happen? Oh my God, right? A quote unquote intermarriage. Bitoch B'nai Israel, in the midst of B'nai Israel. Remember, we just saw Bitoch when we were instructed not to profane God's name. Vayinatsu, and they fought b'machaneh, in the camp. Ben hayisraelit, the ish hayisraeli. So the son of the Israelite woman, right? It doesn't say the Egyptian man now, and An Israelite man. So there's some guy here of mixed parentage fighting with someone who's of pure parentage. So already all our alarm bells are going off. Like, what is going on? And this sounds so disturbing and even offensive, right? So what happens? Vayikov ben ha'isha ha'Yisraelit, and the man who's the son of the Israelite woman, Vayikov. So what's Vayikov? So here it says, pronounce the name in blasphemy, but hold on to that name, to that word Vayikov. We're going to look at it in a minute. What does it really mean? Et Hashem. So Vayikov et Hashem, the name of God, the Shem. It doesn't say which Shem, but we assume, as Rashi does, that it's Yud He Vav He. Vayikalel, Vayaviu Oto El Moshe. And look at this kind of, I'm sorry, did I translate that? Vayikalel, and pronounce the name in blasphemy. Vayikalel is another very interesting word because it forms the root of klala, curse, but it also means to make light, right? To make light of. It's the opposite of kavod, to make heavy, right? To honor, to make heavy, to give something its due, to acknowledge its gravitas. Okay, so now look at the last part of this verse. So we are in verse, I don't know, because the verses are not in this passage, but it says, V'shem imo, look at this tagline, how interesting. And the name of his mother is Shlomit ben Divri. I'm sorry, good point. Bat Divri Limatet Dan. So the name of his mother is Shlomit, which comes from the word shalom, wholeness, peace. The daughter of words. So what's going on? The daughter of words. Okay. And the tribe of Dan, which is considered generally the lowliest tribe. And then Vayanichuhu, the Mishmar, Lifrosh Lahem al Pi Adonai. And he was placed in like a holding place, I don't want to say pen, but a holding place to find out what God was going to say about this. In other words, Moshe didn't know what to do with this. There's no law on this, and Moshe had to wait until, to hear God's word directly about how to resolve a situation like this. Okay, so hold here.
Which is weird because one of the 10 commandments is
Right.
like you're not allowed to take God's name in vain. And
so yeah, one of the 10 commandments, as Rabbi David is saying, is not to utter God's name in vain. Is this uttering God's name in vain? Because that word isn't used here. So, or is it something else? I don't know. So did Moshe not know because it's not covered under that law? Or did Moshe not know because he never expected something horrible like this to happen? Or did Moshe not know because the punishment is actually not specified in the 10 commandments?
it's also true.
Also true. Okay, so now I want to skip a little bit. We're going to come back here, but I want to look at a few things before we finish the rest of the passage. Look at source 6. So it says he blasphemed, right? Vayinakov. So let's see how that. V'nokev Shem Adonai. Vayikov. It says above, the son of you pronounce the name and blasphemy, right? So what does that mean? Vayikov? To pierce, perforate, bore. A point. I have no idea what it's a point. To prick off, designate, to be pricked off, to be designated. So I can't think of a context in which it means to be designated, but okay, we'll put that on a hold. To curse, to blaspheme. So it sounds eerily similar to the Vayichalel, right? What's going on? To chol, to make empty, to pierce, to perforate. So that's really interesting. So there's something about emptying out the name of God. Is it emptying out of meaning? Is it emptying it out of kedusha? So let's go on. So Rashi says, Ufaresh, okay, I'm sorry, Vayikov. So he is explained Vayikov Ketargumo. In other words, he's talking about Onkelos who translated the Torah into Aramaic. Sorry, I can't see this, a little small for my eyes. Shenakev Shem HaMiuchad V'Gidef, so that he perforated or he blasphemed the special name, right? The Yud Hey Vav Hey name, the Yud Hey Vav Hey name, the Gidef, which seems to be a rabbinic word for blaspheming, which also means to empty out or hollow out. V'hu Shem HaMifurash, and it's that special name, that explicit name, that he heard at Sinai in the verse that we first started with, right? Anochi Hashem Elohecha, right? When God introduces God's self to the people of Israel at Sinai. Okay, so I see several hands. We're going to stop for a few minutes, and I want to go to a really important midrash, and a few midrashim, one ancient, one contemporary, and further consider what it means to blaspheme. Okay, so I'm going to ask you, just because I have a lot of text to do today, I'm going to ask people to be really concise, and I'm going to go with Jay and then Nehemiah.
Just tying together the prizes of
Jay, I don't hear you.
I'm unmuted.
Oh, you want my speaker?
Jay, we can hear you. Sorry about that.
Okay.
On Zoom.
We can hear you.
Okay, Jay's over there. People want, yeah.
I'm no longer in a cell phone commercial. Okay. Tying together the two esteemed teachers, one surprise at Bat Divrei, and then the connection possibly to the 10 Commandments. We've got Bat Divrei and Aseret HaDibrot. So maybe this.
Bat Divrei, yes.
And Bat Divrei and Aseret HaDibrot.
Nice, that's interesting. So she might be the daughter of the commandments. Nice. Okay, Nehemiah.
Shabbat Shalom, Kehila Kedusha, the rabbis. The word lecholel inspired me. So many meanings, more than any other word that I know of in Hebrew, and opposite meanings. So much that I wrote a poem when I studied for my first Shotokan karate, who was a yeshiva bocher, Meir Gano, Gil Mahono. So, the word lecholel can mean to dance. I wrote, האיש שכתב בגופו את הכת החולל שיר, the one who wrote in his body this beautiful action, created a song, but they create, they defile, they make empty, they heal, they fear, they חילי לידה when you give birth. So therefore, I believe that beyond the dualistic feelings that like, you did this and this is given to you, which is what's right for that time. There was a Kabbalistic meaning, which I don't know because I didn't study it deep enough, that sanctified to the place of non-duality of unity. Dibarti.
Shamati. Thank you for expanding our understanding of that word. Okay, I'm going to go on. I don't see any other hand. Yeah, halal panui. So the empty space in which God dwells.
Right. God empties God. God almost is the halal his own.
Oh, like God empties out God's own space
in order to then refill it with, there's a
to refill it. Yeah,
to refill
the world that becomes a halal panui.
Yeah, it's a beautiful idea.
Doesn't whole mean sand?
Whole also means sand.
Is it from the same shore?
Eileen Musan, do you know?
It's interesting. It's not as far as I know, but it's interesting because it's played with. Like the idea that whole is in dynamic tension with Kodesh is like that's part of what we're talking about here, which is like the holy name versus the Ben Kodesh L'Chol. And there's also in Kabbalah, there's a lot about sand becoming like when sand becomes a mirror. No, but sand becomes a mirror. When sand becomes unified, it becomes a mirror.
How does it become a mirror? I don't understand.
So glass itself, not a glass is
I see.
Right. Sand is
I see.
the process of uniting sand, right? And something like There's something about
turning sand into
turning
glass.
sand into
becomes
glass.
a
It
mirror.
becomes
So the whole becomes Kodesh when it becomes a mirror for all of humanity.
All humanity
Or
becomes, or
God.
transparency, like to some degree, the whole itself, sand is expressed by separation, and when it becomes refined and unified to some degree, it becomes also.
Oof.
It's a teaching from
Beautiful.
Alan Afterman in John of the Book Kabbalah and Consciousness. But anyway, I just wanted to respond only to.
No, but that
go
was
back
beautiful. Thank you.
to,
Wow.
Rabbi
Wow, wow.
Dan,
Yeah.
when
Lori.
you're not
Okay, can everyone hear Lori on the screen? I just want to make sure. If not, I'll respond. I'll
No, they
repeat.
should be able to hear.
Yeah. Okay. Lori.
So
Speak up.
having been around people that are in a lot of suffering, when their hearts crack open and the pain is so great from the darkness, when you pour your heart out to Hashem, it's like you're cracking open. And many people tell me they just pray and they fall to the earth out of loneliness and emptiness. And that's the hollowness of like the cry for Hashem. At the moment of suffering, when nothing comes in and you surrender and God returns. through
So the
open
hollowness
heart.
and experiencing the hollowness, I think Lori's saying so beautiful that we end up reconnecting to God and unifying and becoming perhaps that mirror. That's a beautiful. I love that. Thank you so much. Okay, there was something else I was going to say about this, but I really don't remember. Oh, Hull. So Hull also in terms of the sands of God's promise to Abraham, right? So we are as many as the sands, the grains of sand, right? The Israelite people, but we're separate, except that we become unified in like this grand vision of God's promise. So, all right, so let's now go to Emor. Did everyone hear?
But also the holy that inheres in a sandy people becomes the unifying place, right?
The holiness that inheres in a sandy people. I love it. I've never been called
Yeah, like
part
it-
of the
it-
sandy
like, you know,
people before.
Right, like you won't. It's like also, you know,
Can someone
Aren't we
take
all a
me?
grain of sand?
you know.
Can
it's
someone
like-
take my image off the screen because it's too.
it's
The grain of sand has become too big. Okay, now.
Exactly.
Thank you. We're going to look at Emor. Now, let me tell you why I chose this midrash. There's a lot of disturbing midrashim about Shlomit bat Dibri. So the name of the mother of the mixed parentage man. And I found one that actually I think goes to the heart of the matter and doesn't denigrate her specifically. And then I found a beautiful contemporary midrash that really raises her up, which I think is appropriate, not just because she's a woman, but I feel like her name, Shlomit bat Dibri, I mean, not every woman in the Torah is like, you know, a heroine. I don't know, but her name, Shlomit bat Dibri, like peace, the daughter of language. Wow. And the rabbis do some weird things about that. Like they say, she was friendly with every man, and that's why she laid with an Egyptian. And, it's like stuff about her promiscuity. I don't want to go in that direction. I just want to sort of tell you what's out there. But instead, we're going to go this way. Vayetze bein isha Yisraelit. So when, okay, so I'm sorry, going too fast. The son of an Israelite woman went out, and he was the son of an Egyptian man in the midst of the children of Israel, and they strove within the camp, the son of the Israelite woman and the Israelite man. So we're recalling the biblical verses. Minayin yatzah. Where did he come from? What's going on? What's the backstory? We don't have the backstory in the Torah, right? Mi beit dino shel Moshe. So from the rabbinic court of Moshe, Sheba lita ohlo betoch machane Dan. So this guy, who's from the tribe of Dan, or at least his mother is, came to set up his tent in the tribe, in the place where the tribe of Dan were setting up their tents. They said to him, Amrulo, Ma tivcha lita betoch machane Dan. What's your status that you should come and set up your tent amongst us? Oh my God, right? That's really not nice. Like, what do you do? I go to a synagogue and someone walks in, like, what are you doing here? Like, what's your status that you should be amongst us? That would never happen in Rome. Just saying.
It's happened to something.
God forbid.
That's
God
true.
forbid,
It's,
really.
it's happened everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
People, say things that they shouldn't say.
Yeah,
Even well-intentioned.
People
sometimes.
feel excluded anywhere, and people sort of code exclusion anywhere, and sometimes it's subtle and sometimes it's explicit. But this midrash I really appreciate because it shows the dangers and the harm and the damage of exclusion. Amar lahen me benot Dan ani. I'm from the daughters of Dan, from the tribe of Dan. Amrulo. And the midrash now quotes somewhere else in Bamidbar, in the book of Numbers, saying, Ish al diglo ba'otot levet avotam yichnu b'nei Yisrael. The Israelites shall encamp, each with his standard by signs, according to their father's house shall the children of Israel encamp. So remember that even though big portions of the Jewish community now are matrilineal, the Bible is patrilineal. So even though his mother is Israelite, his father is Egyptian. So they're saying, and they take out a proof text to show you don't belong. You're not part of us. So just imagine how he felt in that moment. Nichnas leveit dino shel Moshe. So he came to the rabbinic court of Moshe. Vayatsa mechuyav. So he came into the rabbinic court of Moshe, and he came out like wrong, right? They say like, no, you really don't belong in the tribe of Dan. And he stood and he cursed. He cursed the name of God. He blasphemed God. So now we know what led him to do that. It was a profound, in my eyes, failure of the community to include him, which led him to puncture a hole, so to speak, in the name of God. Okay. Hu ben ish mitzri afal pisha lo haya mamzarim ba'oto shana. Hu haya mamzer. So he was the son of an Egyptian man, even though there weren't bastards. So in other words, if someone is born out of wedlock, they are considered, they have the status of a mamzer. Even though that wasn't the law at that time, he was considered a bastard, basically. Kim mamzer. He was like Kim mamzer, as if he was mamzer. Betoch b'nei Yisrael. So remember the words that he cursed or he blasphemed God's name in the midst of Israel. They're saying that those words actually teach us that he converted. So if he converted and they rejected him, even more, it's offensive to begin with, but even more offensive. The Yinatsu b'machaneh, al iskei machaneh. Sorry. Over the fair of the encampment. Okay, we don't need to go to the rest of it. All right, so that's big, right? That's a big backstory to help us understand, and it's obviously it's a rabbinic backstory. We don't know what the backstory is, but it's a rabbinic backstory, a story behind the story to help us understand what is going on here. And what's going on here is, a lot of human pain and exclusion and rejection and all the things that might lead us to curse life or God, right? Or the people that we're with, the community that we're with. Okay, so now I want to.
Amazing, Joe, that Moshe, of course, when you hear about this, one of the things you think about Moshe is that Moshe is a similar problem. Like Moshe, you could describe Moshe as a Jew who was a Ben Mitzri.
Exactly.
He's right. Like he's so implicated in this. He has so many.
Right.
He has a Jewish father. He has an adopted, Egyptian father.
Yeah.
He's, when the Torah, now I have an insight. When the Torah says that Moshe first comes out of the house and he sees an Egyptian and an Israelite fighting, and then he winds up using the name to curse. He uses the name apparently according to
kill the Egyptian.
To kill the Egyptian,
right? Which
is interesting because it's interesting to think about it psychically that maybe what he saw outside was also what was going on within him. He went outside of the house and he said to himself, here I am. I'm in a war between my Egyptian identity and my Jewish identity. And so that he used, he had to kill off one part of himself. But now it comes back full force, right? It comes back full force, and maybe he doesn't know what to do.
And maybe that's why he didn't know what to do.
Of course, it's because
it's about him.
Of course it
is.
And
it's
recuse himself.
His own karma being reflected back to him at this moment. And it's interesting because the Midrash takes the word vayinatsu, right, which links those two episodes, the episode of fighting now and the episode of fighting in Exodus when he saw the Egyptian hitting the Israelite, right? He saw, it's fighting the next day when he saw two Israelites.
The two Israelites fighting, but right. Yeah,
whatever.
but it's connected.
It's connected. And they say that Egyptian man that he killed was actually the father. He's the Egyptian father. And that he came in the middle of the night when Shlomit Bat Dibri thought it was actually her husband and secretly slept with her, and she became impregnated. There are all kinds of interesting midrashim trafficking around this story, which means that we don't know what the story means. Like, why are all these stories going on? Yeah, Alan, what do you want to say?
Is it possible that the person with whom this half Jew had the fight was Moshe? Because it's translated in English as a certain Israelite, but in Hebrew it's Hayisraeli. And I
Let's look
found
back.
that strange, as if
Could it be Moshe? Could it be Moshe? I mean, I would think that the text would tell us it was Moshe if it was Moshe. It could be Moshe.
I mean, as if
Technically.
we're supposed to know who that person is, the Israelite. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, you're right. That's really interesting. So, and he fought with the Israelite man. Who is the Israelite man? I think Alan's actually making a really good argument and spinning a kind of convincing midrash that the man that he fought with was Moshe himself. Now,
So
why
that
would he?
might be why he's so confused. He is upholding what he thinks is the law,
Yeah.
which is that the tribes are, passed through the father.
Yeah.
But this is wrong.
Yeah. But there's something about this that is fundamentally wrong and leads to disaster. Okay, good. Yeah, Yonatan, raise your voice.
I was just thinking about Yaakov and the angel, it's similar. Like it's interesting that it's the word Israel becomes a lot because Israel is discovered, right? It's the question of how it happened like that.
So Yonatan is saying that the word Yisrael comes up a lot, and it reminds him of wrestling with the angel. And the word Yisrael, one of the meanings is to wrestle. So that makes sense. Beautiful. That's a really interesting association and intertext, especially if we're going to go with Rabbi David's sense of like the shadow sort of in back of Moshe, because Yaakov is fighting with his shadow self, which is Esav, right? The Midrash tells us that Yaakov is fighting with, Esav's guardian angel. So it could be another story of fighting with one's shadow. Fascinating.
I don't know where you're going to go, but
I'll tell you in a minute.
but I'm really curious what your thoughts are in terms of the biblical context. I know we don't know what the story means in like the details, but in the sweep, like in Parshat Emor, coming after the priests and coming after the holidays, right? I'm curious, like
we're gonna get to there in the end.
Okay,
you gonna stay with us?
I won't be able to. I have to go. There's a bar mitzvah. I have to go. But I'm curious where you're going to go. No, you'll tell me later. It's okay.
No, I'm going to show you right now.
I'm curious. It feels almost like this is exactly what you can expect if you're going to have Kohanim and priests and so on. Right.
Do you want to say something about that? Do you want to finish your point? No, we're going to do one more text, and we can. Okay. All right. So now, it's interesting. I was searching for like, what does this text mean? And I found not someone who I know, but someone I consider. I've never met her. I'd like to meet her. A teacher for me in Torah.com. Her name is Wendy Zierler. She's a professor. She's a Maharat. She what?
She's in my school.
She teaches at HUC. She also has a degree in creative writing. I mean, she seems like an incredible person. And she wrote this midrash interpretation of Shlomit Bat Dibri, and it's worth reading the whole piece. And I gave you the website, the link at the bottom. So I'm going to ask someone online to read this in a loud voice on Zoom. Alana, can you read it? Alana Klugman, would you read it?
Sure. Given the context of Israelite enslavement in Egypt, it is not possible that Shulamit, like so many African American slaves, were raped and impregnated by their masters, might have been abused and used by a slave master or overseer. And that is how she came to give birth to the son of an Egyptian man. According to this reading, Shulamit bat Divri was a struggling ex-slave and single mother who labored against all odds to raise her son and shield him from the prejudices of the surrounding community. Alas, the son who the text presents as a ben, a son or boy, rather than an ish, a man, hinting perhaps at his not yet or barely emergent manhood, went out of his mother's tent and discovered that the world around him was not what he expected. He saw that he was a second-class citizen in a society of former second-class citizens, that he was not wanted among his would-be brethren. His mother may have attempted to counter and to diffuse his youthful anger when it flared. Befitting her name, Shalomit, from Shalom, peace, she may have tried on any number of occasions to bring peace and calm and to shore up her son's bifurcated identity. But when Ish Yisrael, a full-fledged man of Israel, told her son he didn't belong, and when Moshe ruled that his son's status as perpetual outsider, that the son's status as perpetual outsider was ordained by God, the son succumbed to rage and cursed the God who had banished him from his assumed place among the Israelites. As Bat Divri, a daughter of speech, Shalomit may have endeavored, just like the daughters of Zelophehad, to speak up, defend her son, and demand justice for him. But tragically, she failed in her bid to save him.
You know, I remember, thank you so much. I find that really poignant and convincing, right? As a quote unquote backstory. And it reminds me also to go back to what Rabbi David was saying about Moses's own dual identity, that the Israelites rejected him and his message, right? They couldn't listen to him and didn't want to hear him and didn't want him as a leader when they were still slaves, and also beyond the point of liberation. So, Moses knows what it feels like to be rejected. And now somehow under his watch, this man is also being rejected.
And he had a double bind.
Moshe.
Yeah.
He was the king of the double binds.
The king of the double binds.
He really was.
Yeah, for sure.
Exactly, couldn't win.
Yeah. All right. I see a couple of hands, Rachel and Jill. Again, I'm going to ask for really concise comments because I want to do a couple of other things.
This is Rachel. My comment is, I don't see any reference to Zipporah. Didn't Moses himself turn around and marry a non-Jew and have children, and that those are the children that she circumcises?
Yeah.
Why is that left out of the story? It seems like a manipulated story to me because it's very illogical.
Well, remember, in the Torah, we're dealing with patrilineal descent. So we don't really care in the Torah that Zipporah is not Jewish.
Oh, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome, Rachel.
Okay, thank you. Oh.
Okay, Jill.
I can definitely see that light bulb moment.
Yeah, I love it. I love that light bulb moment. Oh, love it.
So yeah, it's interesting. Before you mentioned that more modern midrash, that's exactly what I was thinking, just given the time that they were in and the power relationships. And so that even makes that struggle with Moshe more palatable, because Moshe is getting all the benefits of being, in the house, basically, and then he can't reconcile the fact that there's this mixed heritage person, and everybody knows that a mixed heritage person is, is likely at that, given the power relationships, to be a child of rape. So it's kind of, the opposite of the way we might think of it in modern, times, like, oh, that's not nice, or that's not fair to be against someone of mixed heritage, but it's more of shame that even happened, because that's part of who he is, and that's where he's being raised. He may have even seen that in the palace.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's an interesting piece of the backstory. Okay, so there's a lot more to do here. I think I just want to take you through a few more texts, just show them to you. We didn't read the rest of the actually story in the Torah, which it becomes very disturbing because the son of the Egyptian man is stoned to death. So you can read that on your own. But I want to look briefly at halal in number 11. So it says, Ki matzeh halal. What's a halal? It's a corpse, right? So this, okay, let me actually read the rest of the verse. Ba'adama asher Adonai Elohecha noten lecha lirishta nofel basadeh lo noda mi hikahu. So this is the case in Deuteronomy of finding a corpse. Someone slain is found lying in the open, and you don't know who has slain the person. But what's interesting to me here is halal. The word halal means, a dead person, as if it were emptied of God's presence, right? Or emptied of their own presence. Somehow, a body empty of spirit. And it says here, halal refers to a human corpse, and based on the context, specifically to a murder victim. Human life is holy, and therefore the murder of a person is an act of desecration, which is implied by halal, whose root is chol, profane or devoid of holiness. Halal also means space or vacuum, and be a reference to the idea that the dead body is empty, lacking its soul, and is therefore like a spiritual vacuum. So again, I think that now we're building a sense of what desecration and what chol and halal means as compared to kedusha. And remember, chol is not always bad, right? Every day is chol except for Shabbat. Where we function in chol. It's hard to function when things are always kadosh, right? Like Moshe, you can't even move. It's like it's too overwhelming. Like on Shabbat, we rest because kedusha. We're with kedusha, and if you really understand what kedusha is, you cannot but kind of behold and stop functioning pragmatically as you do the rest of the days of the week. When you're in awe, you just kind of stop, right? Beholding the wonder of the universe and feeling the presence of one another, the presence of God, the presence of the majesty of the world and of nature. Yes, Yonatan, loud.
It seems to me the word chiloni, secular, as a derogatory term.
So Yonatan saying something very interesting. In Israel, chiloni, which is meant that non-religious people in Israel, can be said in a derogatory kind of way.
So there's different types of possibilities that the secular people are calling themselves, even though they're not calling themselves necessarily secular. It's an external type of definition. So some call themselves, kipash kufa, like I have some sort of faith, but it's just not on me.
Ooh.
There's some that call themselves halonai, which comes from window, which is I'm like opening a window and I'm the one who's in
So Yonatan is talking about revaluing the word chiloni, and that really started with Rav Kook, Abraham Isaac Kook, who's the first chief rabbi of Israel and a mystic, and saw kedusha residing in the people who were chiloni. And Yonatan's saying the specific ways that people are revaluing and sort of playing with that word to show that, no, I'm not devoid of kedusha. Why would I describe myself that way? That's brilliant. I love that. Thank you so much. I want to hear more about the ways that's happening. Okay, so 2 more quick texts and maybe a couple of comments if we have time. So this is really interesting so there's a law about a corpse hanging overnight. You must not let the corpse remain on the stake overnight. If someone is guilty of a capital offense and you impale the body on the stake, don't let them hang there overnight. Why? For an impaled body is an affront to God. You shall not defile the land that your God is giving you to possess. So we have the word here, kilalat Elohim. So that means a demeaning of God, a lightening of God's weight. Remember, we discussed klala, curse, is the opposite of kedusha, but it's also the opposite of bracha, blessing. Okay, so let's see why. So I love this little Talmudic text. Maybe I'll just do it in English, so to save a little time. Okay. Sorry. Okay, Rabbi Meir says, the sages told a parable. So here we have a parable, a little mashal to understand why it's an affront to God, why it is a desecration of God to leave a corpse hanging overnight. It is comparable to two brothers who were twins and lived in the same city. One was appointed a king, while the other went out to engage in banditry. It was kind of like the prince and the pauper, right? The king commanded that his brother be punished, and they hanged his twin brother for his crimes. And anyone who saw the bandit hanging would say, the king was hanged. Ah, they're twins. Who's hanging there? The king therefore commanded that his brother be taken down and took the bandit down. Similarly, people are creating God's image, and therefore God is disgraced when a corpse is hung for transgression that the person has committed. So we can't demean each other, because if we demean each other, if we profane one another, we're also profaning God, right? God in whose image we were made, because we are twins, so to speak, with God, twins with the king, the queen. Let me tell a little bit something that came up in adult B mitzvah class this week when we were studying this. Not this specific text, but the text about the blasphemer. We're discussing what it means to blaspheme, and I won't quote the person by name because I don't have permission, but they said an example of blasphemy, and I really love this, is like when I look at myself and I say, oh my God, like I say to myself, you're so stupid, why'd you do that? You're so stupid. You're blaspheming the one in whose image you were made, but you're forgetting that you were made in their image. So there's all kinds of ways that we can empty each other out of kedusha, right? Violence, the way we use words. If kedusha is to be filled up, then our language can empty each other out, or even ourselves out.
The fight between the ego and the soul.
The fight between the ego and the soul. Interesting. Okay, so I want to end with one more piece from the theologian Rachel Adler, another person who I don't know, but has been a teacher for me from afar. And I really love what she says about blasphemy, which I'm going to leave us with. What did it mean in ancient Israel to blaspheme? The verb nun kovet, remember we talked before, vayinkov, I forget exactly how to say it, emptying out or perforating, suggests that cursing God is an act of violence. The name Yud-He Vav-He, derived from the verb to be, may mean the one who is, or was, is, will be. In other words, the name of God is every tense, every conjunction of the verb to be, so it puts us in all time realms, or being or becoming. This is the name that is associated in rabbinic texts with the attribute of mercy, right, of rachamim. In ancient Israel, as in many cultures, the name partook of the reality it represented, which is why we talk about the importance of not taking God's name in vain or cursing God's name as opposed to cursing God, right? There's something about the name, right, that represents God, is not identical with God, but you damage, so to speak, divinity when you curse the name. Hence, the blasphemer who tears a hole in the divine name tears a hole in the integrity of all that exists. All that the one who is being called into being, right? So remember, God created the world with language, and then we can destroy God's name with our language. We can destroy worlds. Okay, here's the connection. Here's Rabbi David's question about the Parsha and more. The name of the Parsha or more means say. The entire section is about the divine sayings to Moses that establish an Israelite universe of meaning, regulations about fitness for the priesthood, fitness for sacrifice, sacred times of Sabbath and festivals, regulations about the sacred place, the Mishkan. The man who utters the blasphemy, it is hinted, is an unsayer. His mother is the daughter of Dibri, which means the speaker. To blaspheme is to abuse language, the building blocks with which God created the universe. To blaspheme is to unspeak the world of meaning that one's community inhabits, hurtling it toward chaos and unmeaning. Okay, let me just see if there's anything else I want to read here. Okay. So I think at this moment, where in the public realm, language has clearly been degraded and demeaned, it is upon us to re-imbue our language with power and kavod, respect and care, and to remember that we really do create worlds with our language. It might be just in our own spheres, or we might be creating worlds for other people to inhabit, but whatever it is, each of our words, like in Genesis, right, sort of establishes something in the world, or can puncture holes, can destroy, right? So to be really careful, even with our internal self-talk, and how do we talk to our, ourselves, is also how we regard and connect to God, in whose image we were created, on whatever level you believe that or you don't believe that. But to establish and hold the dignity and the kedusha, the holiness of, of the presence of being on this earth. And I invite you to look at all the texts. We didn't get to all of them on the page, and also further resources. And I think we have time for everybody to hang out and talk to one another before services, so we can keep the Zoom room open. And Margot, do you want to say a few closing words, and then we're going to close?
Yeah, and I love everything you said, and I agree with it all. And yet we are God wrestlers. And there's a beautiful Aaron Zeitlin poem. Let's see if I can remember it. Praise me, says God, and I will know that you love me. Curse me, says God, and I will know that you love me. Praise me or curse me, and I will know that you love me. Yet if you look at the stars and yawn, I will have created you in vain.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much.
If you see injustice and don't cry out. That's not the whole poem, so I'm bringing back. So
put the name of the poem in the chat.
Oh, yeah. I know the author's name. I don't exactly know I can put it, I'll put as much as I can remember.
Whatever you can. Look at it. Identifying information. All right. Thank you, everybody. Shabbat shalom. And Celia, I think they're going to hang out and talk.